I'm about to do something that I've never done before. Though once a year during the high holidays, I read my Dvar, I never, ever read someone else's. But nevers are meant to be broken. And there are several reasons I have decided to read someone else's Dvar tonight. One, as we mark the 70th anniversary of the State of Israel, it made sense to me that we hear the words of an Israeli, someone living in Israel, someone deeply embedded in the unfolding of its history. Two, though I had prepared thoughts for tonight, I was overwhelmed with emotions this morning when I watched the video of the speech I am about to share. I felt it conveyed perfectly the deep sense of brokenness, the wrestling with the bitter and the sweet of the song we just heard that is Israel. It showed the multidimensionality of a people, its plurality of thought, its moral wrestling, which is a far cry from the Israel right or wrong slogan of the Jewish community here. Just as it is a far cry from the monolithic anti-Semitic descriptions of the Jew haters and Israel bashers, all too happy to paint all Israelis as all Jews as Nazis, oppressors. 3, it shows a reality of the Israel-Palestine story that touches so many, yet is mostly ignored. Namely, the terrible loss that unites the bereaved families on both sides of the conflict. 4, because these words could have been spoken not just in Israel, but right here in America, as we too are fighting against the same forces, the same rules. Though they are specific to Israel, these words express a global concern, a global fight against the re-emergence of fascism in whatever disguise it has morphed in the 21st century. This speech is by author David Grossman, whose son, Uri, was killed in the 2006 Lebanon war, and whom last Tuesday night, on the eve of Israel Memorial Day, addressed bereaved Israelis and Palestinians at an alternative Memorial Day event in Israel. Though some bereaved Palestinian family were able to attend, the current Israeli government barred most Palestinians from traveling to the event, as you will hear him mention in his speech. Now, make no mistake, David Grossman is a fierce lover of Israel. And as the fierce lover that he is also one of his most ardent critics. Here's what he so beautifully said in Hebrew. He had a beautiful Hebrew, by the way. Dear friends, good evening. There is a lot of noise and commotion around our ceremony, but we do not forget that above all, this is a ceremony of remembrance and communion. The noise, even if it is present, is beyond us now. Because at the heart of this evening, there is a deep silence. The silence of the void created by loss. My family and I lost Uri in the war. A young, sweet, smart, and funny man. Almost 12 years later, it is still hard for me to talk about him publicly. The death of a loved one is also the death of a private, whole, personal, and unique culture with its own special language and its own secrets, and it will never be the same again, nor will there be another like it. It is indescribably painful to face that absolute existential no. There are moments when it almost sucks into it the whole of existence and all the yes. It is difficult and exhausting to constantly fight against the force of gravity of loss. It is difficult to separate the memory from the pain. That is why it hurts so much to remember. But it is even more frightening to forget. And how easy it is in this situation to give in to hate, to rage, and the will to avenge. But I find that every time I am tempted by rage and hate, I immediately feel that I am losing the living contact with my son. Something there is sealed. And so eventually, I came to a different conclusion, to a different decision, my decision. I made my choice. And I think that those who are here this evening, all of you bereaved families of the conflict, made that same choice. And I know that within the pain, there is also breath, creation, doing good. That grief does not isolate, but also connects and strengthens. Here, even old enemies, Israelis and Palestinians, can connect with each other not just out of their grief, but in fact because of it. I have met quite a few bereaved families over these past years. I told them in my experience that even when you are at the heart of the pain, you should remember that every member of the family has the right to grieve their own way, the way they are, and to follow the guidance of their own soul. No one can instruct another person how to grieve. It is true for a private family, and it is true for the larger bereaved family. There is a strong feeling that connects us, a feeling of a joint fate, and the pain that only we know, for which there are almost no words, no expression outside of it in the light. That is why, if the definition of a bereaved family is genuine and honest, please respect our way. It deserves respect. Ours is not an easy path. It is not obvious. And it is not without its internal conflicts and contradictions. But it is our way to give meaning to the death of our loved ones and to our lives after their death. And it is our way to act, to do, not to despair and not to desist, so that one day in the future, the war will fade and maybe cease completely, and we will start living a full life, not just to subsist from war to war, from disaster to disaster. We, Israelis and Palestinians, who in the wars between us have lost those dearest to us, perhaps more than our own lives, we are doomed to touch reality through an open wound. Those wounded like us can no longer foster illusions. those wounded like us, know how much life is made up of great concessions, of endless compromise. I think that grief makes us, those who are here tonight, into more realistic people. We are clear-eyed, for example, about things relating to the limits of power, relating to the illusions that always accompany the one with power. And we are warier, more than we were before the disaster, and are filled with loathing every time we recognize a display of empty pride, of slogans of arrogant nationalism, of leaders' haughty statements. We are more than weary. We are completely allergic. This week, Israel is celebrating 70 years. I hope we will celebrate many more years and many more generations of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who will live here alongside an independent Palestinian state, safely, peacefully, and creatively. And most importantly, in a serene daily routine, in good neighborliness, that they may feel at home here. What is home? Home is a place whose walls, borders are clear and accepted, whose existence is stable, solid, and within which its people can relax and be comfortable, whose inhabitants know its intimate codes, whose relations with their neighbors have been settled. It projects a sense of the future, of continuity. And we, Israelis, even after 70 years, no matter how many words dripping with patriotic honey will be uttered in the coming days, we are not yet there. We are not yet home. Israel was established so that the Jewish people who have nearly never felt at home in the world would finally have a home. And now, 70 years later, this strong Israel may be a fortress, but it is not yet a home. It may be a fortress, but it's not yet a home. The solution to the great complexity of Israeli-Palestinian relations can be summed up in one short formula. If the Palestinians don't have a home, the Israelis won't have a home either. The opposite is also true. If Israel will not be a home, then neither will Palestine. I have two granddaughters. They are 6 and 3 years old. To them, Israel is self-evident. It is obvious to them that we have a state, that there are roads and schools and hospitals and computers, even in kindergarten, and a living, rich Hebrew language. I belong to a generation where none of the things were taken for granted. And that is a place from which I speak to you. From the fragile place that vividly remembers the existential fear, as well as the strong hope that now, finally, we have come home. But when Israel occupies and oppresses another nation for 51 years, and creates an apartheid reality in the occupied territories, it becomes a lot less of a home. And when Minister of Defense Lieberman decides to prevent peace-loving Palestinians from attending a gathering like ours, Israel is a little less of a home. When Israeli snipers kill dozens of Palestinian protesters, most of them civilians, Israel, for me, is a little less of a home. And when the Israeli government attempts to improvise questionable deals with Uganda and Rwanda and is willing to endanger the lives of thousands of asylum seekers and expel them to the unknown and even to their death, to me, Israel is a little less of a home. And when the Prime Minister defames and incites against human rights organizations, and when he's looking for ways to enact laws that bypass the high court of justice, and when democracy and the courts are constantly challenged, Israel becomes even a little less of a home for everyone. When Israel neglects and discriminates against residents on the fringes of society, when it hardens its heart to the plight of the weak and the voiceless, Holocaust survivors, the needy, single-parent families, the elderly, boarding houses for children removed from their home, and crumbling hospitals, it is less of a home. It is at best a dysfunctional house. And when it neglects and discriminates against 1.5 million Palestinian citizens of Israel, when it practically forfeits the great potential they have for a shared life here, it is less of a home, both for the minority and for the majority. And when Israel strips away the Jewishness of millions of Reform and conservative Jews the world over, again, Israel becomes a little less of a home. And every time an artist, a creator, has to prove in his or her creation loyalty and obedience not only to the states but to the ruling party, Israel is a little less of a home. Israel is painful for us because it is not yet the home we want it to be. We acknowledge the great and wonderful things that happen to us by having a state, and we are proud of its accomplishments in many areas, in industry, in agriculture, in culture and art, in high tech, in medicine, economics. But we also feel the pain of its distortion. A home where we would live in peace and safety, a clear life, a life that will not be enslaved by fanatics of all kinds for the purpose of some total messianic nationalistic vision, a home whose inhabitants will not be the material that ignites a principle supposedly greater than them and supposedly beyond their comprehension, a home where life would be at the scale of its humanness. That suddenly a nation will wake up in the morning and know themselves to be human. And that this human will feel that she is living in an uncorrupted, connected, truly egalitarian, non-aggressive, and non-predatory place, however you say that. In a state that runs simply on being concerned with a person living within it. For every person living within it, out of compassion and out of tolerance for all the many dialects of being Israeli. Because these are the living words of Israel. A state that will act not on momentary impulses, not in endless convulsion of tricks and winks and manipulations and police investigation and zigzags and flip-flops. In general, I wish our government to be less devious and wiser. One can dream. One can also admire achievements. Israel is worth fighting for. And I also wish these things for our Palestinian friends. A life of independence, freedom and peace, and building a new, reformed nation. And I wish that in 70 years' time, our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, both Palestinian and Israeli, will stand here and each will sing their version of their national anthem. But there's one line that they will be able to sing together in Hebrew and in Arabic. Liyot ham chofshi be'artzenu. To be a free nation in our land. And then maybe at last, it will be a realistic and accurate description for both nations. Amen. I read these words again and again. I've read them several times today. And he describes my Israel. If I lived in Israel today, I would have been right next to that guy. He described an Israel of which you can be really proud, an Israel worth fighting for. And he describes an Israel that has a lot to do still. And for some reason, and you know the reasons, these words sounded really much like they could be addressed in front of the Lincoln Memorial to this government.